ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवांश श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्ण पादान् सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नम ओं विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिन्निति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Manah Shiksha series. Yesterday we began the discussion on verse 2, the commentary by Bhakti Vigyan Goswami Maharaj. So I'll just recap what we discussed up till yesterday, and we'll continue our discussion. Maharaj's first theme from paragraphs 1 to 16 is one pointed in our goal. Raghunath Das Goswami is making it very, very clear. Vraje Radha Krishna Prachur. We have a Bahushaka because of other desires. But we should have one desire, that is love for Krishna. And we should just love God, not just worship God. And if we worship God for material gain, then that gain is more than important than God itself for us. So then we use God for fulfilling our desires, which is not recommended. It is called as Sakama Bhakti. We should do Nishkama Bhakti. And this one-pointedness, Maharaj gives the example of Arjuna, when Duryodhana asked, how do you hit the target? And similarly, we should, when we look, we should not see anybody but Krishna. But in conditioned life, we see Maya. And we should accept in our heart Krishna as our pati, just like a faithful wife is devoted to her husband. So that's how we should accept. And Maharaj gives the example of how a wife decorates only for her husband, but an unchaste wife puts on ornaments because she wears them for everyone. But we should, our heart should be only attracted to Krishna and nothing else. And everything we do is only for Krishna. So then Maharaj gives that example of how the sadhana siddha gopis could not go to the Vamshi Bhat when Krishna played his flute because their husband stopped. The external obstacle was actually an internal obstacle. They had still some attachment, to their roles as that I'm, the wife and he is my husband. So that internal obstacle manifested in their husbands stopping them and bolting the doors. So similarly, there are some subtle uh, righteousness we have, and we should also become free from that. And that is also a kind of attachment to pride in the form of virtues. And if you know that Arjuna is, he's son of Dharma, and he had that righteousness that I'm truthful. And when Krishna told him to tell lies that Ashwatthama is dead, Yudhishthira hesitated for a moment to do that. And what happened? His chariot, which was above the ground, it came down. Not because he told a lie, because he hesitated to follow the instruction of Krishna. So similarly, we should become free from that also, Maharaj explains. And then Guru and Lord Chaitanya, how we should see. Lord Chaitanya is non-different from the son of Nanda. And Guru is the very confidential Saki, servitor of Srimati Radharani. That's how we should see Guru. And then Maharaj took to the theme of Satguna, detachment, faith, and love. How being in the Satguna is dharma. So the more you follow dharma, the more you come to Satguna. And this Satguna leads to detachment. But there is an important element. There might be others in this world who are living sattvic life. But if they don't have faith, that will not lead to purity. So Satguna leads to purity and detachment, and ultimately, that will lead to love. So this was a theme Maharaj brought out. And then we discussed this verse, Tavat karmani kurvita na nirvidyate. So by, following this dharma, Vedic dharma, what happens? We become nirvidyate. We become indifferent to the temptations. And that is the sign of the purity of the heart. So we should become free from Jad Katha and Maya Katha. And by watching news, we strengthen our faith in Maya Katha. So we should, this is one anartha which we should really work on. And the more we are attracted to Krishna Katha and the more we are detached from Maya Katha, the more we are, progressing. Now today's theme is give up adharma. That was the first line of Raghunath Das Goswami. Give up adharma. Now, Maharaj goes quite deep into, how these four regulative principles, how we should very strictly follow. So let us go through this theme now. Give up adharma. There are general fundamental principles of renouncing adharma that apply to everyone, which we should follow. In our practice, these are called the four regulative principles, which Srila Prabhupada called the regulative principles of freedom. These are foundation of Vedic culture. Next paragraph. In 1983, there were some attempts to recruit me in the KGB. I was promised various benefits if I worked for them. And I was also threatened with dire punishments if I refused. So Maharaj was to be recruited in the KGB. I did not want to at all to work for them in any way. But at the same time, I was frightened. Finally, I plucked up the courage and went to the person who had threatened me to give him my final answer. I stood in front of him, a man twice my size. I was a graduate student then, and was trembling. As I stood before him, shaking like an aspen leaf, I took a deep breath and said, I thought about it and decided that I will not work for you because this does not correspond to my principles. Now let's see what Maharaj, what he responds. When he heard this, he cried out, "What principles do you have except the four regulative?" I was shocked by the fact that even the KGB knew about the four regulative principles. But in essence, these four are the basis for the development of bhakti in our hearts. These are the basis of dharma, the basis of happy life in this body, not to mention life in the next world. We must clearly understand where this foundation is, because sometimes we have deeply hidden doubts that can make us stray far away. We hide what we treasure most, so we hide our values. We hide our doubts about Krishna deep in our hearts as something most treasured. As long as I have these doubts, I can enjoy this world. When there are no doubts, there are no more chances. In a sense, we should have no doubt in the regulative principles. They are the basis of a normal life in this world. So Maharaj is setting up the importance of the four regulative principles as our core values. And if we are not so strict about following these four regulative principles, we still have some doubts. That means we still want to enjoy this world. So Maharaj is now going to take up each of these regulative principles and expose how we can, hide these values in order to, somehow sneak out and try to enjoy and not strictly follow these principles. So let us see in the next paragraph, Maharaj brings out each of them. The first regulative principle, no eating, is obviously foundational. Our hearts become cruel because we become contaminated by living life. Any person with even a little intelligence understands that meat eating should not be done. Now, Maharaj gives an example of how these core values sometimes we try to escape so that we can enjoy. I knew a boy, now a young man, who became a vegetarian because his mother accidentally put a rabbit's eye in his stew. Stew is a preparation with vegetables and meat. He saw the eye and then he realized where meat was coming from and he stopped eating. Usually, devotees have no problem with following this principle. I also know a 5-year-old boy who became a vegetarian under someone else's influence. Since then, he has been saying to his grandmother, "Grandma, why are you eating corpses? How can you eat these corpses?" His grandma replies, "Why are you always spoiling my appetite?" You see how, when the right philosophy is spoken, how we come up with, arguments. So, there are many statements, I don't want to make my stomach a graveyard. You are putting in bones inside. It's like a graveyard. But, you come up with some reasoning and don't want to follow these core values. So this is the first thing Maharaj explains. Now he goes to the next one in the next paragraph. But there are principles that are harder to accept, such as no gambling. The three remaining principles, gambling, intoxication, and illicit sexual relations, have something in common. All these three have something in common. Meat eating is one, Among the four, meat eating is separate now, categorized. But these three have something in common. Let us see what is it. Our future in Krishna consciousness depends on how well we understand this point. They have passion and attachment to the body in common. Because of attachment to the body, a person does many things that tie the person to the body. So this is the common thing. The more you take intoxication, the more you become attached to the body. The more you do gambling, the more you become attached to the body. And Prabhupada, in one initial, when he started the Hare Krishna movement in New York, Fifth Avenue, when he was giving his Bhagavad Gita classes, and the hippies came in, and one of the rock stars was a famous, rock star. He, along with some of his girlfriends, came in, and Prabhupada was giving a lecture, and he was stressing on the regulative principles: no eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication. So this rock star asked Prabhupada, no illicit sex? How is that possible? No, we cannot live without it. So Prabhupada said, straight away he said that, sex is the highest enjoyment in the material world, but it is the greatest source of bondage, What to do? I cannot compromise these principles, for you, he said straight away. Prabhupada was uncompromising, and that's why he was successful. So what is common in all three? They, bind the soul to this body. We become attached to this body. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada calls these principles the regulative principles of freedom. So if you follow this, you're not bound. So let us see how Maharaj is going to now explain how this happens, this phenomenon. All the four sinful activities enslave us, forcing us to become addicted to the body, so much so that ultimately there is no self-control. Whether we take intoxicants, gamble, or have illicit sex, we will ultimately become slaves to that activity. So that's how it binds to the body. It may seem like the price we pay is not so high, but the price is suffering. We may spend some money gambling, but the winnings can be huge. Drugs may cost a certain amount, but we think the result is worth it. But when we want to buy something very big for a very cheap price, it is called cheating, and we cheat ourselves. Therefore, the ultimate result is pain and suffering, and the inclination to deception becomes increasingly stronger. So those who are alcoholics, as students, I remember one of my friend's student, how he started this habit of drinking, and then, he used to deceive his mother very intelligently, get the money out and go and drink. So, the inclination for deception becomes very strong. One of our friend is writing a book on these, how, these addictions, an entire book he's writing. And he was sharing with me that in Canada, there was a very it's a true story, a very wealthy man whose son was addicted to alcohol. And the father was really concerned. And he had made sure there were security guards, bodyguards, and he was always monitored so that he doesn't touch alcohol. So all these rules, were set in for him so that he doesn't get into this addiction. But somehow or other, the son is to find ways and means so that he can drink alcohol. So it was said that, he told his father that I'm going with my friend uh, in a car ride, and father sent with the security, and they came back and the car was parked in the garage, and he had told his friend, instead of the fuel, to empty the tank and put in alcohol. And in the night, he got up and he went, and from the car nozzle, he was trying to suck in alcohol. And the father somehow saw that the light is on in the garage, and he came down to see, and he saw that, his son was so desperate to drink alcohol, and he really felt, compassion, and he allowed him to drink. So this is the kind level of deception you can go. It becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Next paragraph. Yes, a person has the right to experience the material pleasures of sex, but what price must be paid for it? Because of lust, children will need to be cared for and worry about over the next 25 years. Why next 25 years? Next 50 years also. If we want to be happy and have a peaceful mind, free from any worry, what price should we pay for it? We could meditate and purify the mind. But why should someone do that if they can go and buy some LSD or similar substance and imagine that they are already there in the spiritual world having visions, and blue complexion Krishna is there too? When Prabhupada started the Hare Krishna movement, everyone wants to imitate Krishna. So there, in one of the temples, there was one hippie, and he had long hair, and in fact, he had a little blue complexion. And because the Krishna consciousness movement was becoming famous in that city, so he started declaring himself that I am Krishna. And in order to attract the crowd, he started giving dollars to them. He used to, in the street, announce that I am Krishna, I have taken avatar to save you all, and take this holy name. In fact, first he came to the temple and declared himself that I am Krishna. And all the devotees were not bothered because they know the philosophy. They just were engaged in their service. So nobody paid attention. So he went out in the street and started declaring, and people were surrounding. And in order to attract more crowd, he started, giving them money. And he lost all his money. So similarly, through LSD and all, we try to do this. But all this is a deception. We are only deceiving ourselves. When we drink or take drugs, we do not become happy. We simply turn into slaves. If we engage in illicit sex, what we get eventually is pain, and terrible things happen to us. Leo Tolstoy, wonderfully, novella, how do you pronounce it? Crusade Sonata describes this very deception underlying illicit sex. But since the result at first glance is huge and the price seems very small, we become attached to these activities. So Maharaj is giving a very deep understanding of how, when we try to break the regulative principles, it's a small thing, but the heavy price we need to pay for it. Next paragraph. Therefore, these four principles are the basis of civilized life, just like there are four pillars of religion: Satyam, truthfulness; Tapa, asceticism; Daya, charity; Saucham, purity. We must follow the regulative principles, and if we do not, then we are cheaters and rascals, as Prabhupada used to say. Since by following the four regulative principles, we are trying to avoid sin in our lives, so that our hearts become purified, we need to clearly understand the nature of sin. So the four regulative principles are way of civilized life, and it is a way to purify our hearts. There is a lie behind the sin, and that is why Raghunath Das Goswami implores his mind in the first verse. Give up the lie that makes you pretend to be something you are not. Something you are not. In our so-called normal life, when we pretend in one way or another to be God, the enjoyer, we commit certain actions that reinforce this proclivity to deceitfulness. I remember in my childhood, one of our neighbor, it was a big royal family, and backside they had a servant quarters, and the servant quarters, there was a Mataji and her kid. The kid was taken care all the education. Once while going to school, he found a purse, and there was money in it, and he utilized that money to buy some things and eat and enjoy. And slowly, now he had taken the pleasure of having the money and enjoying things. So he started robbing money from the royal family's house. And later on, this habit went to such a deep extent that he started robbing from other neighbor family houses. And next to my house, there was another house. He, in the late night, barged into it and robbed huge amount of money and ran away. So he got addicted to that habit. And first time, you cheat yourself, and that inclination to cheat becomes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's why we should be very, very careful, and we should be very, very sincere and honest. And we should have counselors, our friend devotees whom we confide, even for even the slightest of the deviations. And we should correct them immediately. This attempt to deceive God and take something very valuable without paying a proper price for it, unfortunately, lives in the heart of every conditioned living being. So this is a very deep-rooted problem in the core. So we have to work on it. Not all conditioned living beings are deceivers, but the proclivity to be deceitful is there in all of us. In other words, not everyone is a cheater, but everyone is a potential cheater. If we allow this tendency to become manifest, we turn from being potential cheaters to actual cheaters. So, even in all our ordinary dealings, we should be very sincere and honest. Suppose we buy something from a shop and we are supposed to get the change back. We are supposed to get 150 back, and the shopkeeper gives us 250 rupees back by mistake. Moment you come to know, we have to honestly inform him. And you have given me extra, please, correct it. But if, you take that 100, there is a subtle phenomena which is happening within us, which we don't recognize. We get a kind of a pleasure. Oh, he did not know that, he has given 100 more. He did not know. But and Krishna knows. And you have got that pleasure now. And you have that extra 100 rupees you have now utilized for, enjoying something else. That tendency will grow and it will turn into a cheating tendency. So that's how subtle it is. And that's why we should be very careful in following these four regulative principles. So Prabhupada says that the tendency to eat meat and the tendency to have illicit sex, meat eating, illicit sex, is there in all species of life, especially in the animal species, all other species also, there is meat eating and illicit sex happening. And gambling they cannot do, but uh, intoxication is that to get intoxicated. Even the ants, where there is sugar, they go and get intoxicated, and that intoxication causes death. So that's how, you know, uh, uh, is the effect of intoxication. So for us, we might think that we are taking intoxication and nothing is happening, but it is invitation to that. Very soon, death is going to happen. So we should carefully study these regulative principles and try to meticulously follow them. So this is about giving up adharma. Give up attachment to dharma is paragraphs 40 to 91. So this is the last theme Maharaj is going to speak. It's quite long, and we will take up this. But before that, any questions up till now for the previous theme what we discussed? Any questions, any clarifications? Yes, Birendra Yadav Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhu, here Maharaj mentions potential cheaters. This is up to Nishtha, Prabhu?
No, it's not really like that. Even a new devotee who has come up, who's taking to the practice, he has to have this sincerity, and he has to be honest. So the tendency is there, but it depends on one's sincerity and simplicity, that he is very straightforward and he doesn't, hide these things, and he confides to his counselors and works on them. The tendency is there, but whenever something goes wrong, even for the slightest, smallest thing, he is open and he doesn't, keep it to himself. And then when you keep it to yourself, then the mind starts scheming. Oh, now you can break this, and with your intelligence, scheme up a new thing. And there, that's how the intelligence starts working against us. And then slowly, that tendency, actually starts manifesting. But if you're sincere and honest, anyone, it depends on the sincerity. And definitely, as we advance to higher levels, we start following these principles more and more strictly. And then definitely it will, yes, definitely when we are at the advanced levels, we are actually very sincere. But even sadhakas at the beginning stages can have this quality. It all depends on one's sincerity. Is it okay, Prabhuji? Any other questions? I would also recommend, there is one book written by Satyaraj Das Adhikari, who is a scholarly devotee of Srila Prabhupada, who has written many books, and he has written this book called as The Four Principles of Freedom. So devotees should make an effort to go, we take these principles quite lightly, and there are a lot of subtleties to that. And Maharaj, Satyaraj Das Prabhuji brings out that how important it is to follow these four regulative principles of freedom. So I would recommend that we can read that. We cannot go more in the discussion there now. I'm just sticking to what Maharaj is saying here. Okay, let us go to give up attachment to dharma. The second verse makes us think about how to go on planning our role in the material world and simultaneously inwardly find ourselves in the spiritual world in Vrindavan. Again, Raghunath Das Goswami is instructing his mind, saying, "O mind, na dharmam suti gana niruktam kilu kuru." You must stop acting in accordance with the dharma described in Shruti, in the scriptures, and you must stop acting in accordance with adharma That is violating your dharma. In other words, you should not follow dharma and you should not follow adharma. This is what exactly Raghunath Das Goswami. Don't follow dharma or adharma. Follow parodharma or Shuddha Bhakti. From the beginning, Raghunath Das Goswami says, Shruti Gana, Vedic scriptures. The scriptures describe every possible responsibility of a living being, both dharma and adharma. There are two categories of living beings. The first is the intelligent, who are enlightened, possess spiritual knowledge, and who live in accordance with the philosophy of the Srimad Bhagavatam. They are called as Vigya. The second is the ignorant, the unenlightened, Agya. Raghunath Das Goswami's instruction, na dharmam, na dharmam, shruti gana niruttam kilparu, is addressed to the Vigyas, the enlightened people. Now, my question to you all here is that when we come to this point of following exclusively Bhagavad Dharma, Vigya, when we become realized, at that point, this instruction of Raghunath Das Goswami is applicable. So what is that stage of bhakti when we are able to give up dharma and adharma, as Raghunath Das Goswami is suggesting here? What is that stage in bhakti? We know the stages in bhakti, na? Shraddha, sadhu, sangha, bhajan, kriya, amrityavati, nishta, ruchi, asakti, bhava, and prema. So at what stage? Yes, Sunita Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I'll try to answer this question. It is asakti.
It is asakti. Okay. Any other thoughts about any others? Would like to say something? Krishna Par Prabhuji. Yes.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, ruchi, because raso varjam rasopyasya param drishtvani vartate.
Okay.
Until unless one has higher taste, one cannot give up lower taste.
Okay. That is also.
So ruchi in a way is a taste that is experienced.
Okay. Rasparan Mataji, what is your answer?
Prabhuji, I feel it is nishtha.
It is nishta. It is nishta. It is at the stage of nishta that one is self-realized. And the conditioning of the sabhava he has overcome. Astita pragya is no more conditioned by the sabhava. He is self-realized. So that time don't follow the dharma. Dharma means based on your sabhava, varnashram dharma. So that time no following a dharma, and there is no chance that he'll do a dharma also. Otherwise, till that stage, we should follow, dharma simultaneously with following the Bhagavad Dharma. We should do that. Maharaj is going to come to that discussion now. So, Kanishth Adhikaris, until they attain the Madhyam Adhikari platform, till then, one should, follow that until we come from the Agya to the Vigya. Although we, know that philosophy that we are not the body, we are the spirit soul. But how many of us have realized that we are the spirit soul and we are on the transcendental platform? And we have the symptoms of a Sthita Pragya. So please check 2.55 to 72 and see whether we have these symptoms of a Sthita Pragya. So only when we have these symptoms by practicing sadhana bhakti, then, Raghunath Das Goswami's instruction is addressed to the Vigyas. Jiva Goswami gives an interesting definition of the ignorant person or the person with materialist tendencies as someone who identifies with the body. Yes, this is the point even I mentioned. In essence, most of us are faced with the same problem. We do not understand we are the soul. We are a soul and we identify with the body despite the numerous instructions we have heard. So How many of us have this understanding that and realization and situated in that platform that we are a soul? Not so easy. Jiva Goswami also gives a slightly different definition that allows us to understand more clearly how to stop being an ignorant person. He explains that an ignorant person is someone whose mind and intelligence is not absorbed in the message or teachings of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Bhog Aishwarya Prasaktanam Taya Aprita Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhi Samado Na Vidiyate. So, Bhoga Aishwarya Prasaktanam. Still our consciousness is having this enjoyment. Taya Aprita Chetasam. Chetasam means the consciousness, the intelligence. Prabhupada also translates like that, if I clearly remember. Let us see. 2.43. I think so. Point 4. Chetasam, bewildered in the mind. Yes. Samadhi. So this is Sthita Pragya. If somebody is in Samadhi, Vyavasayatmika Buddhi is Sthita Pragya. If he is not, then there is, the consciousness is still locked in enjoying matter. So this is another understanding by which we can understand. These people are not fully focused on the teachings set down in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and have not learned to see the world through the prism of these teachings. The only way to remove the ignorance of identifying with the body, as we explained in verse 1, is to stand back and look at ourselves with an outward eye from the point of the view of the Bhagavad Gita and the other scriptures. If you remember in our discussion, Maharaj brought out this point, how to look from the outer eye, the observer. One who is the seer, he doesn't enjoy. The observer doesn't enjoy, and one who is enjoying doesn't observe. We brought out that philosophical discussion. We discussed the Patanjali Yoga Sutra verse and even other references also, if you remember in our class. So that's the only way to remove the ignorance. We take to take Krishna's standpoint. Why does Srila Prabhupada call our path Krishna conscious? It is because of how we should look at everything. So Maharaj is going to give an example. Krishna consciousness, this term seems quite simple. What does Krishna consciousness mean? Let us hear from all the devotees who are in the Krishna conscious movement. What does Krishna consciousness mean? Anyone would like to define what is Krishna consciousness? Virendra Yadav Guruji, yes.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu Dhanatna. Prabhu, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says at many verses, Mat Chitta, he uses this word, Mat Chitta.
So what does Krishna consciousness mean for you?
Our consciousness totally locked on Krishna.
We are always conscious about Krishna and we are not conscious about the body. So Krishna Matir Bhavita, that is the definition given by Ramananda Rai to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That the Mati is always, in Krishna. That is how Prabhupada picked up the, of the name of his society, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So how we look at everything. Now, Maharaj gives an example of how we should look at everything. For example, the first time Srila Prabhupada flew on a plane, he was going from New York to San Francisco. The plane started approaching San Francisco and he saw small houses and cars moving on the roads, which fascinated him. He started saying, look, they are like matchboxes. Then he called his servant and pointed out at the tiny houses through the window, which delighted the servant to look at all this together with Srila Prabhupada. Then Srila Prabhupada looked at him and said, now imagine how this entire world looks from Krishna's perspective. If it appears so small, even from a plane, and the people running around are very insignificant, so imagine what all this looks like to him. So just from an airplane, few thousand feet above, we can see that all these are like small buildings are like matchboxes. And and we cannot see the living beings also, they're moving around like tiny insignificant ants. So if this is our view, perspective, from Krishna's perspective, from Golok Vrindavan, what must be it? So Prabhupada, was seeing like that. The path of Krishna consciousness means to look at everything from Krishna's perspective. And that we try to see everything in terms of Krishna. So this is the art of how to become Krishna conscious. Once Srila Prabhupada, was regularly renewing his visa for America, and he had to visit the visa officer to get a long-term visa, to get his visa extended for a long term. And Prabhupada, along with his secretary, went for the interview, and the visa officer was a lady. And being very intelligent, she asked, can you tell me the essence of your philosophy in few words? And Prabhupada said that Krishna consciousness means to be conscious about Krishna all the time. But that's not possible, she said. And then Prabhupada gave the example. Just like every day morning, you dress up very beautifully, apply makeup, and you come to the office and you're working in the office, but you're always conscious how you're looking. Although you're attending to your work, but you're conscious, how am I looking? Similarly, we should be always working for Krishna, but be conscious about Krishna. So she liked the example. So Krishna conscious means to be always conscious about Krishna. So the example Prabhupada gave made sense to her, because she was always conscious how she is looking beautiful, although she's attending to work. So this is the art to become Krishna conscious. Everything we should see from Krishna's perspective. If we have learned to see the world from his viewpoint, then we move from the category of the ignorant to the category of enlightened. So this is what we call in Sanskrit as Shastra Chakshu, seeing everything in the light of Shastra. Next paragraph. What does an ignorant person need to do in order to move into this other category? We have already established with certainty that we fall into the category of ignorant. First thing, we should know that. What do we need to do while we are still ignorant? We need to follow dharma. So this is a very, very important point here. Raghunath Das Goswami's instruction, na dharmam, until we come to the point where we are vigya, we cannot disobey that. We need to follow dharma. Now, Maharaj starts elaborating on this in paragraph 48. We can't identify with philosophy. We cannot see this world from Krishna's perspective. So what can we do? Focusing on Krishna isn't so simple. We should focus on how to observe the rules of the scriptures that constitute dharma. And this is something that anyone can do. So that's why we have to follow the rules of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Constantly to think about Krishna is smaranam. But for that, the consciousness to fix on that is not possible. So we have to follow the rules and regulations of Vaidhi Bhakti. We must now clearly understand at what point we can and must reject all these instructions of dharma. Here Raghunath Das Goswami says that we must do it. Na dharmam, na dharmam, shruti gana niruktam kila kuru. However, we need to understand when we must do that, because we must be careful not to do it prematurely. If we do that too early, the result can be very unfortunate. Now, Maharaj will explain that with some examples to understand how we should not do it prematurely and how to understand at what time we should do it. All that will come up in the explanation. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu brought, what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu brought is not just bhakti, but a special form of bhakti that we all must aspire to as the highest religious principle. He brought us Raga Bhakti of Vrindavan. He came to give people Rag, a form of practice that should develop in our hearts as a burning desire to serve Krishna, just like the inhabitants of Vrindavan have done and are still doing. The instructions of Manah Siksha are to be followed so that ultimately this Rag, attachment to Krishna, is awakened in our hearts. The first verse, which we have discussed, introduces us to the sphere of spiritual attachment, explaining the major obstacle to the development of this attachment, which is Damba. The first verse, that's why Maharaj went into a lot of analysis of Damba, which is an obstacle to develop attachment to Guru, Goshte, Goshtaleshu. Pride forces us to identify with this body and the roles we play in life. It forces us to become attached to the material world. This is the weakness of the heart, Hridaya Dhaurbalya. This is the weakness of the heart, Hridaya Dhaurbalya, which is, called as one of the anarthas in the heart. Later, Raghunath Das Goswami describes specific forms in which this pride manifests itself. But at the very beginning, he says that in order to develop attachment, we must overcome our pride, and simultaneously we must start forming our spiritual identity, which consists of spiritual emotions. From his first instruction, Raghunath Das Goswami explains that we should try to attain our spiritual selves, being attached to the spiritual world, Vrindavan, the inhabitants of Vrindavan, the spiritual master, the holy name, the mantra, which the spiritual master gives us, and ultimately the ever youthful couple of Raj. Now, next paragraph, beginning from the second verse, he explains step by step what we should do. The first step Raghunath Das Goswami gives to his mind is, oh mind, give up attachment to dharma and adharma. Give up attachment to following the religious principles and non-following of religious principles. Although this is a seemingly paradoxical statement, Bhaktivinoda Thakur resolves this contradiction. Now, please hear attentively and try to understand this. On the one hand, we are told to follow the principles of dharma, and we promise our Guru that we will follow the four regulative principles. Yet, on the other hand, we are told, well, give it up. All this is nonsense. Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam raja Bhagavad Gita. Even if you are absolutely ignoramus, means ignorant, you can still go back to Krishna. Even if you are a mlecha and having nothing to do with Brahminical culture, you can still go back because these things are unimportant. Yet, it is easy to become confused whether dharma is important or unimportant. We may oscillate from one extreme to another. Vedic culture, true culture is so important because it actually reflects the laws of the spiritual world. Now, Maharaj is going to now clarify in the next few paragraphs this important point of what Raghunath Das Goswami is saying when he says give up dharma, what exactly it means. He is going to clarify through Bhaktivinoda Thakur's statements, but he is setting the background here. The principles of Brahminical culture, strictly speaking, are not just some fanciful conventions. They are profound laws that help us to tune into the right mood, which is very important because the law of the spiritual world is to always be in the right mood, the basis of which is to surrender to God. The materialistic Brahmanas forget about this detail of mood, although they observe everything else. And this classic example comes in the Srimad Bhagavatam, how the Yagic Brahmanas, they were performing a yajna to satisfy Vishnu. But Krishna and Balram, who is the source of Vishnu, for whom they were doing the yajna, when they went and asked the yajna ahuti in the form of some prasad, they denied. So, this brings out, that they were, not in the mood. They did not understand the right mood. And they were following meticulously, chanting all the mantras and doing this yajna. So the Yagic Brahmanas are said pride due to following of Varnashram. So they were attached to following the Varnashram dharma and not developing that right mood of pure surrender to Krishna, which is the highest dharma. So sometimes following dharma can become an obstacle, and that's what Raghunath Das Goswami is addressing here. Therefore, any religious preacher or true messenger of God comes and says, Na dharmam, na dharmam, shuti gana niruptam tulpara. All this is good and bad is just nonsense. However, it is very important not to throw the baby out with the bath water because these principles are nonetheless essential. When somebody is crossing a bridge, he has to cross the bridge and then you can cut the bridge. When he's crossing halfway, if you cut the bridge, neither he'll be able to cross the bridge and he's going to fall deep down and destroy himself. So, the one side of the bridge where you're following dharma is important for you to cross the bridge. And once you cross the bridge, then you cut that attachment to dharma. Otherwise, if you stick onto that, you go back there, then you'll not go to that highest dharma of surrender, of pure love, based on pure love. That's the point. The primary principle is love of God. Yeah, Maharaj is bringing out that point, what I discussed just now. We should forget ourselves and give up our selfishness. We must purify our hearts so there will be an outpouring of pure love to serve Krishna. But there are also secondary principles. The secondary principles means, for example, that we should eat with our right hands and we should use left hand to take care of what comes out as a result of our food intake. Or we should not give or accept anything using our left hand, which is the behavior of someone familiar with Vedic culture. But in no way should we confuse the primary and the secondary principles with each other. So these secondary principles are dharma, which lead to purity, and the primary principle is love of Godhead. So both the primary and the secondary has to be followed. A balance should be there. And once the primary becomes prominent, then the secondary need not be given much importance. But the secondary also has to be followed until we come to that level of purity. So we should not confuse between the two. Now Bhaktivinoda Thakur clarifies all this, and Maharaj is going to quote that. In Chaitanya Shiksha, Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives us a recipe or an algorithm that we should follow. He explains all these secondary principles and says that a person who does not follow them develops hard-heartedness and adverse condition. In one way or another, if a person does not follow these principles of Vedic culture, then attachment to the modes of passion and ignorance grows stronger. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains in which way the secondary principles should be combined with the primary principles. So now Bhaktivinoda Thakur is going to give the combination. Now, I'm just asking all the devotees here, what do you think are the four primary principles as devotees we should follow? Which are the four primary principles we should follow? What do you think? You can try, you can guess what are the primary principles we should follow. What do you think are the primary principles we should follow? Yes, Krishna Par Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Navavidha Bhakti, or in short, chanting and hearing.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, these are the Navavidha Bhakti and chanting and hearing, especially the five important limbs of Bhakti which can give us prema. Yeah, you have a question? Yes, Prabhuji. You have a question? Yeah, now let us see how it should be combined. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is giving a formula here. First of all, he says person should follow all the primary principles. There are only five main principles of devotional service. Panchanga Bhakti, Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtan, Bhagavad Shravan, Muttarava, Sri Murti, Shraddhaya, Sevan. Those are the association devotees, chanting the holy name, studying the scriptures, living in the holy place, and faithful service to the deity found in the Lord. We should always, at least in our minds, live in the holy place. We should hear the scriptures. First of all, Srimad Bhagavatam, we should chant the holy name. We should associate with the Vaishnava and we should worship the deity. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that first we should adopt these five primary principles. They must become the center of our lives, because in any situation, whether it is condition, situation, or situation in spiritual life, they are the basis of spiritual existence. In the spiritual world, we will do the same. So in the spiritual world, we follow the primary principles. What do devotees do in the spiritual world? Where do they live? First of all, they live in the holy place. They live in the spiritual world. Do they worship a deity or not? They do. Krishna. They take care of him, they feed him, they bathe him and dress him. What else they do? Do they hear Srimad Bhagavatam? They do constantly. They constantly speak about Krishna, and that is it. Do they associate with sadhus? Certainly. Do they associate with materialists? No, because there are none. Do they sing the holy name? Yes, they do. In other words, those five items are both sadhana and sadhya at the same time. These principles constitute not just the method, but also the goal of our spiritual practice. Whatever we are practicing is Panchanga Bhakti. This is the same we will continue to do in the spiritual world with more love, with more purity. That's it. When we attain the goal, we will do the same, but in the right state of mind and heart, when our hearts will be absolutely pure and overflowing with love. That's what I also mentioned. Therefore, when asked, what is the result of your chanting the holy name? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. Srila Prabhupada would reply that we will chant even more. So I hope the primary principle is clear to all of you. Now, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's statement regarding the secondary principles, which is very important for us to understand. But at the same time, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that along with these 5 basic principles of bhakti, we must decide what to do with the secondary principles. Some of us choose the option to follow what we want. Others follow all the principles, or others follow only the principles that have been taught. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur says from the very beginning, never mind how difficult it may be, and no matter how long it takes, we should try to follow all the secondary principles. From the very beginning, not only we should adopt the basic principles, but we should also we should study and achieve perfection in following all the details. As bhakti develops in our hearts, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains we must give up those principles that contradict bhakti. What is most surprising is that at the beginning he suggests we follow all the principles, even those that contradict bhakti. There are actually many principles of Varnashram that contradict bhakti. When we talk about Vedic culture, the first item that comes to our mind is worship of demigods. We are advised to worship this demigod and that demigod. For instance, Sachi Mata used to worship the goddess who protects children. She worshipped this goddess of snakes to prevent reptiles biting her little Nimai. Yet worshipping devatas contradicts bhakti. Another principle of Vedic culture that contradicts bhakti is that we must respect a person according to their varna and their social position. Following a similar principle of bhakti, we respect a person not because of their varna or their external position, but because of their devotional qualities. Nevertheless, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that at the beginning, we must follow all the principles. We must follow all the principles. This is because, first of all, we are attached to the body, and secondly, because we do not yet have sufficient bhakti ourselves to see bhakti in others. So this is the reason we need to follow. We are attached to the body and we don't have enough bhakti in ourselves to see bhakti in others. Bhaktivinoda Thakur in one of his bhajan, he says, Saraswati jala pibo, magibo, sopachere ghar magibo biksha. He says, I will go to in Navdeep in a Sopacha's house. Sopacha is a dog eater. And from his house, I will take biksha. Now, think about the statement of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is in ecstasy. He is in, an elevated level of devotion. And his bhakti, he is seeing by his bhakti that this Sopacha, because he is living in Navdeep, he is a devotee. He is seeing him like that. And whatever is offering, although you might feel that it is contaminated, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur is seeing him like that, so his offering, he is seeing it as pure. And although it might be impure, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur takes, he will not get affected by it. Because of his vision, he is seeing like that. But if we, if we are not having that bhakti, we are not having that consciousness, we might, artificially go and, beg from that house, madhukari, and take. And when we eat, because we are still attached to the body, our consciousness, our body, both will get affected. So these are the two reasons. We are attached to the body and we don't have sufficient bhakti. Therefore, from the very beginning, when we just begin our path of devotional service, we must follow the maximum of what is possible of the secondary principles. We must not neglect any details and nothing should be considered trifling. So that's the point Maharaj is making. Now, we will continue this discussion. It's a long discussion and it is not clearly understood by devotees many times. And that's why there is a long narration given by Maharaj. And I am definite devotees will have questions about this. And we will take up those questions when we continue the discussion. We'll need another class to finish Bhakti-Vigyan Goswami's commentary. And that we will take up next time. But any questions up till now, if you have, you can ask. I just took a little more time because I wanted to finish at least a particular theme in this part, what we were discussing now. Any questions, any clarifications anyone has? How many were able to follow the flow of thought, what Maharaj is explaining about, the primary principles, secondary principles, about, dharma and the highest dharma? Virendra Yadav, you have a question?
No.
You are able to follow. Okay. So it is a difficult subject because, I'll try next time to make a small chart and explain it and make it more clear as we finish the discussion of what Maharaj is explaining. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami ki jai. Shri Manah Siksha ki jai. Hare Krishna.